Hello and welcome to another episode of All Politics is Local. I'm your host, John Tian. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, feel free to visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. We have yet another great episode planned for you tonight. With me in the studio is Jim Miller of the Interpreter Magazine, www.interpretermag.com. Jim, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me here, John.
Jim is a managing editor over at the Interpreter, and we basically, let's just dive right in. What's the Interpreter all about? What is it you're doing over there?
Oh, well, the Interpreter is a magazine that covers mostly, it's a news magazine that covers Russia and Eastern Europe, which means right now we're talking a lot about protests today in Moscow, and also, of course, Ukraine, and oil prices, the collapse of the Russia. It's been a very busy year, John.
Okay.
Sochi Winter Olympics, you know, a few wars,
A number of things happening.
a number of things. So we do a lot of translation, and we work with the journalists on the ground, and we also analyze citizen videos. So these are, you know, YouTube videos or things like that posted by, by citizens.
Yeah, citizen journalists, the bloggers.
These are just people who witness tanks rolling by or protests in the street or whatever it is, and we verify that information and make sure it's right and coordinate it and sort of make data points out of it.
Okay. So here in this country, we do have some protests going on nationally, mostly against police, what a lot of people are considering overuse of deadly force by police, specifically against people of color. What are they protesting in Russia? You and we talked about it before. We're going to get into race relations here in the United States probably much later in this episode, assuming we have enough time in an hour to get through all of it. But what are they protesting in Russia these days?
Well, so there is an opposition leader in Moscow named Alexei Navalny. And Navalny ran for mayor last September 2013. And, mayor, the current mayor of Moscow is a good friend of Vladimir Putin, president of Russia. And so elections in Russia these days are pretty rigged. So first, they put Alexei Navalny on trial and trumped up fraud charges. As a matter of fact, the prosecution, I believe they put on 18 witnesses, and 17 of them testified against the prosecution and sort of defended the defendant. Defendant doesn't get to put on any of his own witnesses. Was found guilty, and that triggered a wave of protests. And that was right before the election last September. And what happened was they commuted the sentence in order to allow him to run for mayor.
Okay.
Now, that sounds nice, except in Russia there's a law that you can't be a politician if you are convicted of a felony.
Okay.
So this fraud conviction would have prevented him from becoming mayor, whether or not he won the election. Most people figured he would get 10 to 15% of the vote. He got 30% of the vote, which is incredible because the vote is rigged. So he got about 27%. So immediately after that, they filed new charges. And he's at a trial. He and his brother have had a trial going on all year, and the trial closed a couple of weeks ago, and they announced that the verdict would be held on January 15th. Yesterday, they announced the verdict would be held today.
Okay.
And so it was sort of a sneaky maneuver.
They wanted to get it in before year end. It's the holidays.
Yeah, sure. Well, what they really want to do is they want to shut down the protests that were planned
Sure.
for January 15th.
Sure, yep.
So they filled the Moscow streets with police, riot police. And we've seen plenty of that
Ferguson,
recently.
Missouri, right?
Of course, in Russia, you can't protest at all unless you have a permit. And you can technically apply for a permit. You just can't.
You can't actually get one.
Get a permit. It's tricky. So anyway, so there were protests. So the verdict was actually announced this morning, and they found the two of them, Alexei and his brother, guilty. No surprise. What is a surprise is they commuted Alexei's sentence and put him back on house arrest, but they sent his brother to a penal colony.
Oh.
So a lot of people said, well, this is essentially, you're blackmailing the opposition by saying, well, look, we won't put you in prison because that will trigger protests, but we'll put your family in prison. Hey, do you have any other family?
Sure, sure.
So that's what the protests were, and of course they were broken up very quickly. So it only lasted maybe about an hour and a half or so. Actually, the interesting, and this is where sort of the crossover happens, because the police in Russia use methods to break up protests that were perfected by American and British police forces during World Trade Organization protests. It's very interesting. So there's a police chief from Miami and another one from London who worked together to develop these protests because London and Miami were holding WTO conferences.
Yep.
And both of those guys now work for the Bahraini government in helping Bahrain put down their own popular uprising.
Wow.
So just sort of amazing that, sort of wherever you fall on these things, they're being warped very much so in overseas.
Amazing, really amazing stuff. What's going on in Ukraine these days? Ukraine was a lot in the news last year with the fight over whether or not it should be ceded back to Russia. The Crimea vote, all of that stuff took place. Shooting down that airliner took place. What's going on in Ukraine these days?
Ukraine is very much going under a political process, and it remains to be seen whether or not it will be successful. So one of the problems is that the former government was very corrupt. People took to the streets. This is the second revolution in about 10 years. That's never a good sign. I've been to Ukraine. The people there are great. They want a European society. They want a modern economy. They don't want a police force that runs on corruption. They don't want governments, that is, giving business to family members or skimming off the top. So that's what brought them to the streets. And unfortunately, once the government was ousted,
or delegitimized,
once they fled, what the new government found is that there was much less money than they thought there was. So some of that was that they were hiding. The old government was hiding the truth, and some of it was
the true nature of what was going on, and some of it was stolen.
The money's in. These guys are living well. Most of them fled to Russia, but also things like the military. So Ukraine used to have nuclear weapons. A lot of people forget this. This is like the last year and a half has been terrible because what's happened is Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons in a deal with Russia and the international community, by the way.
The IAEA was involved in that, correct?
Absolutely, and the United States was very much involved, as was NATO, Europe. And what the deal said is, look, you don't need nuclear weapons. We're past this. You can, scale down your army. We're going to turn Eastern Europe into a modern European society. And of course, now you have Ukrainians turning around and saying, well, wait, we don't have much of an army. We don't have equipment. It's all in disrepair because this government that just left is so friendly with the Putin regime. And we gave our nuclear weapons to Russia, and now
we have nothing.
Yeah. So they are, they're still fighting a war. Russian troops are still operating in eastern Ukraine. Grad rocket launchers are just flattening areas of the country. There are still tanks. There is a tentative ceasefire. So things are a lot better than they were. But the Russians are still there. They still occupy a large part. And I'm not even talking about Crimea, which is effectively Russia.
Right.
I think it's important not to recognize it as part of Russia. But it's effectively Russia. It's controlled by Russian troops. But we're talking about eastern Ukraine here. And so here's what the Ukrainian government is in a bind. Because in order to get out of the hole that they were in, they took a loan from the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. But the IMF says, okay, you have to cut government spending. You have to cut your deficit.
Geez, austerity.
It's austerity. And And now the Ukrainian government has to put in an austerity budget while they're basically at war with their largest trading partner, and while they're significantly ramping up government spending on the military because they kind of have to.
Right, right.
So these things are sort of all coming into place now. Nobody's happy.
And don't they have some real issues as far as like even natural gas for heating?
They do. So Russia supplies a lot of natural gas. And you know, Russia has been in a trade dispute that predates the revolution, by the way. Russia has been waging a trade war against much of Europe for the last 2 years to keep these European countries from joining the European Union.
Right.
So Russia sort of has this Soviet Union mentality right now where, you know, you can't be part of Europe and trade with Russia. This is the Russian thinking. And of course, we think this is ridiculous, right? I mean, whether Ukraine is, when I looked at how the American stock prices, for instance, were impacted by the Ukrainian crisis, apparently American businesses just don't do any business with Ukraine. Or we just don't care whether they're in the EU or not.
Right.
You know, but in the Russian mentality, that's right now, that's a big deal. So what's happening, and also the rebels control a lot of the coal. So there's not enough energy to go around the country right now. And again, this is, you know, another example, and you and I have talked about this off camera in the past, of Europe is very much reliant on cheap natural gas from Russia. In very much the same way that the United States is reliant on cheap natural gas and coal that we produce domestically, and cheap oil from, you know, from the Middle East. Or this has been the model, right?
Right, right.
And the problem is that it's a very short-sighted model. And Europe is suddenly realizing this. So you have countries that were very much against fracking or anything like that. We can't have fracking. Now they're realizing that they have to frack out of a national security urgency.
Sure.
It's
Out
like,
of their own best interests.
Oh my God, the lights are going to go off if we don't frack because we burn oil that
or
or
natural
we
gas.
burn natural gas rather that comes from Russia.
Right.
And by the way, it's cold in Eastern Europe.
Right.
And actually, you know, they've lucked out. You know, global warming is a real thing. And even last year, when we had very cold, very cold winter here,
With the polar vortex,
with the polar
et cetera.
vortex and everything, the rest of the world had a hot winter, and Russia and Ukraine benefited from this. But it's still a hot winter, still really cold,
Really cold over there, yes.
and really long, and so they're shutting off. You know, you see rolling blackouts and things of this nature. And what's interesting is, Ukraine actually supplies utilities to both Crimea, which is now run by Russian troops, and to eastern Ukraine, run by these Russian-backed rebels. And people say, well, geez, why would you do that? And there's two reasons. Well, the first reason is Ukrainian government's official position is this is Ukraine. Those people are Ukrainians. We can't shut the gas off, the electricity off on our own people. We'd just be giving up our claim that this is
that these
part
are
of
the
the
people
country.
we represent. Or,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, the other reason is because Russia, for most of the past year, has had an incredible amount of firepower on the border. So if Ukraine cuts the power, Russia would have no choice. But what's happening is, what's happening recently, like in the last month, it's getting interesting. Russia has had a massive economic crisis. The price of oil is going down. You may have noticed it at the pump.
Yeah.
I have.
$2.39 a gallon I paid today.
That's nice. That's nice. It's not so nice for Russia.
Actually, $2.29
Whoa.
I paid today over at the Valero station on Route 109.
Wow.
So for those viewers that are in the Milford area,
There you go. Head out right now.
$2.29 a gallon. Of course, today's date is December 30th. This show won't be airing until January sometime, so may even be lower.
Well, maybe lower. But so what's happened is that the Russian economy is in crisis because it's so reliant. There's not a lot of industry in Russia. Russia has married their currency to the price of oil and natural gas. And so a series of things. Russia nationalized a private gas company. These things this is what Russia's been doing recently. So that triggered this sort of crisis that's been spiraling out of control. Now, in some ways, that's good news for Ukraine in the short term, because they've actually been able to temporarily, rolling blackouts, turn off the electricity in some of these rebel-controlled areas temporarily to conserve, because they have to. They're out.
They're out of oil.
They're out of gas.
Yep.
They're literally out of gas. There's that saying that we use. Literally happened. But also, in the long run, though, this could force Putin to do something crazy. 2015 could be a very dangerous year. We've been. There was an article that came out in Slate last week, and I'm in the midst of sort of pushing back on it a little bit, because the article said that the world is actually getting much, much safer and much, much better. And actually, for the most part, that's true. Even in 2014, with Ebola, or the crisis in Ukraine, ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and these things that we sort of focus on. Actually, the world is still getting better. The problem is that there are very troubling warning signs that trend is reversing. It may not bounce back to, say, a Rwandan crisis or World War II, okay?
Yep.
But it only takes one nuclear war to really mess up the graph that talks about how the world is getting better.
Right.
And in 2014, that was the first time that we are closer than we've been since really the 1960s, I think, to a real military conflict with Russia.
A real shooting war.
A real shooting war.
Well, we have to avoid that at all costs. So we've actually used up about the first 15 minutes of the show here talking about Russia, et cetera. All politics being local, I love to bring things back to a local perspective. And one of the funny things that has happened to you in the last several years was, given the nature of your job, you work a lot, or you watch a lot of different human rights type stuff worldwide. You're looking at Amnesty International, you're looking at Human Rights Watch, et cetera. And suddenly you saw a byline you're used to seeing, things like Uzbekistan or Bahrain or all those hot spots worldwide, and suddenly you saw something pop up with a byline of Uxbridge, Massachusetts.
So I used to, before I worked on Russia, I worked on the Middle East, so Syria, Egypt, Libya, Bahrain, the hot spots. And I use Twitter a lot. And I have a piece of software that has different Twitter columns. So I have a human rights column. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like you said, it's always, Syria, Russia, and all these foreign countries. And then the freshman representative from Uxbridge, Massachusetts. And I literally almost fell out of my seat.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, I've never seen my home district in the national news.
Yeah, or international news.
International news.
Yes, yeah.
And what it was I believe it was Amnesty International, but it went even further than that. There was a lot of politicians and organizations talking about this. Statements from Ryan Fatman, who was representative somewhere over here. I don't remember where his I don't remember where his district was anymore, because then it switched.
Yeah, it switched, but it was Uxbridge, Douglas, Sutton, and Northbridge, I believe.
Yeah,
those four towns, or maybe a piece of one or the other.
Maybe a piece of one or the other, but it was definitely over there.
Yeah.
And
so I actually have a graphic showing his quotes. Brett, if you don't mind, could you bring up graphic D1? And we should see that on the screen shortly. There we go. So Ryan's exact words, my thought is that if someone is here illegally, they should be afraid to come forward. If you do it, that is immigration, the right way, you don't have to be concerned about these things. Now, he was asked about, this was in the debate about the Secure Communities Act, and he was asked about women who are undocumented and here in this country, if they've been attacked or raped. The part of the Secure Communities Act was the fear that it would create a problem for people wanting to report crimes because they would be in fear of being deported.
That's right.
And his response was about as hard-hearted as is humanly possible, saying that they should be afraid
to
come
look,
forward.
This is a big deal. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch One of the things that they do is they look at when a government has a problem, and I think we can agree that illegal immigration is a problem. When a government has a problem, they're going to institute laws to fix that problem. And are those laws humane, or do they do things like encourage people to rape or hurt people or throw them in prison?
Right. Do they form an underclass of people who are suddenly susceptible to exploitation?
That's right. And you know, I followed this, so I was shocked to find that, you know, Amnesty International was talking about this issue. And you know, when you read the initial report, the reporter was very kind to Mr. Fatman, because he asked follow-up questions like, are you really sure you wanted to say that?
You wanted to go on record this way?
Yeah. And Ryan Fatman's response was, yes, I really, you know, I'm okay with this.
Right, and Brett, if you could bring up graphic D2, we have part of his response right here. D2, if they are here illegally, they have committed a crime. So now this is a state representative who doesn't understand that immigration law is not part of the criminal code.
Yeah, that's
immigration law is civil law. I disagree with calling these people illegal aliens because they are people. They aren't illegal.
Yeah.
And being civil law, well, if I have a habit of rolling through stop signs, for instance, am I an illegal driver? I don't think so. You know, it's really wrong. Ryan went on to expound a little bit more. I don't have a graphic on it, but he said that he would also be in favor of deporting children who are here, who are born here in this country and you know, born to illegal immigrant parents. He would deport them along with their parents.
Yeah, and I think so. There's another aspect to this that I don't think people may realize. But you know, the federal immigration is a federal issue. It's when we say that, that is not just passing the buck. It's a federal responsibility. We have taxpayer money that is dedicated to immigration services that is deporting people. Okay. We, as taxpayers of the town, pay for a police force, and it does not do immigration. That is not what the police force is for. They don't have the budget to do it. They don't have the resources. They don't have the manpower. And God forbid if they did.
The expertise or the training or
That's
any
right.
of those things.
I mean,
exactly.
You know, if we were to right now say, well, we want the police force to do this, it would be a terrible thing, because we'd be asking a group of people to do something they have no training or expertise in, and/or it would cost us a whole lot of money instantaneously. I mean, the whole idea is just completely crazy. And the thing is, too, though, it's also political theater. Because if you know anything about how the state house operates, this idea was never going to get anywhere in the state house.
Right.
Okay. So what we did was we wasted, and this is a lot of the issues that we talk about when we talk about Ryan Fatman. We waste a lot of time and energy, and he alienates his peers and aggravates them and frustrates them. And when I say his peers, I mean his Democratic and Republican lawmakers.
The fellow representatives.
His fellow representatives in both the House and the Senate, because they waste time getting dragged into these debates rather than, you know, running the ship.
Yeah, rather than doing things that really need doing.
That's right.
So, to his credit, at a recent campaign or candidates forum that we held here in Milford when he was running against Senator Moore, and since then he has won that election and become our senator-elect and soon to be sworn in as our senator. To his credit, he seems to have softened his stance. And so, Brett, if you could pull up clip D, that should be the one where it talks about where Ryan talks about his new stance, apparently, on immigration policy.
Thank you very much for the question. And as you're probably aware, I've made this a very important issue in my campaign. The reason is, when I knock on people's doors, it's what they talk about. And it's also something that I believe is a problem personally. These problems didn't happen overnight. They happened over the course of the last 44 years. Massachusetts has put in place policies that incentivize illegal immigration. And that's not fair to a whole heck of a lot of people. One of those policies is not requiring a social security number to get access to certain benefits. Now, we do for welfare, we don't for housing, we can do better. I also think that this problem breaks down on a fairness to the people who choose to come here the right way. I've met plenty of them. Georgina, who lives in this town on Diana Circle, she came here with her entire family. It took 20 years. She left her family for a better opportunity in this country, in this state. It is not fair to her to give opportunities for people who don't follow the law. It's also not fair to the people who, are working taxpayers and see that money abused and get frustrated with it, sometimes even angry. But I go back to Georgina because 20 years is a very long time. And then I think of Rosalina, another woman who I met who lost her job because somebody was able to undercut the market and get paid below her $10 an hour job. They didn't have to record it. They gave the immigrant $7 an hour, $6 an hour. We don't know. And that to me is the crux of this problem. It's also not fair to a lot of the illegal immigrants. And let me explain that statement. There are illegal immigrants here who are not seen, not heard, who have violence committed upon them and are not comfortable going to the police. We need to solve this problem because that's a humanitarian issue as well. I think we need to make sure that our policies in Massachusetts reflect those of other states. Arizona.
Thank you, Ryan Fatman. Thank you.
So interesting that he should change his stance. I wonder if perhaps there was enough pushback to get him to formulate that change in his stance towards
Yeah, I mean, look,
undocumented folks.
we need effective policy. We need humane policy. Look, to his credit, some of the issues that he's bringing up are problems. I used to work at the Registry of Motor Vehicles in Framingham, and I once denied a man his license because he didn't have the appropriate documentation.
Yep.
And he said to me, look around you. A lot of people in this room are here, and they're going to give you fake documentation, illegal documentation. There's a massive black market here, and I'm the one doing it right, and I'm the one who gets in trouble. And what I would say to Mr. Fatman is yes, and it's the Republican Party that's blocking most of the efforts to reform immigration at the federal level.
Exactly.
To fix the problem.
We look at things like the president's recent executive actions on immigration, and the Republicans are up in arms about it. The president had one awesome response to them. If you don't like what I'm doing through my executive actions, pass a bill.
Yes.
Pass a bill. Yeah. Send it to my desk. Let's do this. Let's pass comprehensive immigration reform, and that's really what we need. The answer isn't demonizing and scapegoating a population of people that are here. What we need to do is pass comprehensive immigration reform and do something that makes sense.
That's right. And there's a lot of myths that were brought up here, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like I said, some of those concerns are valid. But one myth, that Massachusetts is incentivizing, there's no data to suggest that Massachusetts is incentivizing illegal immigration any more than any of our neighbors. We're not a border state. So we have a lot of illegal immigrants, and they're coming to us in a different way than, say, Arizona.
Right.
But they're coming to us the same way Rhode Island or Connecticut or New Hampshire. And, there's just not enough data here to support the argument that Mr. Fatman is making that somehow and by the way, the argument that this is somehow Senator Moore's fault.
Right.
Is even more preposterous because Moore is one of the people who has been, I think, trying to get some responsible legislature passed, and some of it he's been successful with, and some he hasn't, and that's politics.
And as far as Democrats are concerned, Senator Moore really was one of the most conservative Democrats around. I think as far as a progressive score is concerned, his score was about 15%. Fatman's is about 10%. We didn't do much of a change here, so it's kind of ludicrous to me.
Yeah, and this underscores the difference between the senator and Mr. Fatman. So full disclosure, I ran Senator Moore's campaign in 2010.
Oh, really?
I did. I was the campaign manager, and and interesting. The senator picked me, knowing that I was not a Democrat nor a Republican. I am an independent. But I've been volunteering for him for a long time, and I don't agree with the senator on everything. But there is fundamentally, he is a leader, and he's respected by both the left and the right and everything in between. And he actually gets stuff done. And at that debate, that forum that we've been playing clips from, sort of remarkable because everything that Ryan Fatman was proud of was a bill that Senator Moore had passed or championed,
or was lead sponsor on,
or
et cetera.
agreed with.
Yep.
So what you see is that Senator Moore is not fundamentally disagreeing with Ryan on these issues, but he is far more pragmatic and far more able to compromise on a lot of these issues than Ryan Fatman.
Right. So, Brett, if you could bring up another clip for us from that debate, I think it was. Let's play clip E. Take a look at what Mr. Fatman had to say about, or Senator Fatman, that is, had to say about taxes.
So the question was it Pam? Ann, my mom's name. I think when you state that raising taxes creates jobs, you've been on Beacon Hill too long. I don't see any economist saying, let's raise taxes and create jobs. That's just counterintuitive. But one of the reasons why I am against the gas tax is because when you fill up your tank in taxes, it costs about $7 per average if you have a 15-gallon vehicle. You have to pay that. He doesn't. To me, that's not right. The second thing is, $679,000 is what it costs for us to maintain our roads, every mile. And so the number in Massachusetts is about 7 times higher than the rest of the nation. The average is about $100,000. And so we've added to the costs of government over the course of time. I didn't help create these problems. I'm dedicated to trying to solve them. The big dig is a big problem. There was project labor agreements. They only allowed unions to bid on those contracts. That's one of the things that drove up the cost. Not that unions do a bad job, they do a fine job. But when other groups are involved, competing and trying to make more bids, that competition drives price down. And so Massachusetts has got it wrong before I was born. And he's been serving before I was born. And these are the kinds of things that I'd like to try to change.
So, a couple of interesting points that he makes there. He doesn't see economists saying that raising taxes creates jobs. Apparently, he's never heard of the Revenue Act of 1932. He's ignorant of the history of the Great Depression. Brett, if you could pull up graphic, I think it's AE2. Take a look at that graphic, a little bit about the Revenue Act. Whoops, wrong one, sorry. Let's try. There's one graphic in there, Brett. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. There it is, the Revenue Act of 1932. This act was passed on June 6, 1932. It was signed by then-President Herbert Hoover, who lost his re-election bid in the fall of 1932 to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It raised the United States tax rates across the board. The rate on top incomes went from 25% to 63%. The estate tax was doubled. Corporate taxes were raised by almost 15%. This was at the height of the Great Depression, where unemployment was somewhere in the neighborhood of, 28%. And the Revenue Act of 1932 actually enabled things like the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, that built things around this country and pulled us out of the Great Depression, the depression that we were in back there in the 30s. And it's kind of ludicrous for him to say that you won't create jobs by raising taxes.
Right. I mean, look, the Republican Party, and when I say that, I mean a very particular brand of Republican that we see today that likes to talk in bumper stickers. Okay, Your average person on the street, if you said, "Oh, will raising taxes, create jobs?" So, of course not. Well, yeah, okay, but will government spending create jobs? Every economist on the planet is going to agree that government spending will actually, yes, create jobs.
Right.
When it was remarkable when George Bush cut taxes in, I think it was 2002.
Well, he had several big tax cuts through there, yeah.
There was a meeting of economists in Switzerland, and unanimously they condemned the decision to cut taxes in the fashion that Bush had announced that he was going to cut taxes. So, we talk, Republicans talk about cutting taxes or not raising taxes instead of talking about what those taxes actually do.
Right.
Paying for things and hiring teachers. And this is actually when we talk about issues like Obamacare. Okay, when Americans are polled and they're given individual line items that are in.
That are
the
in the
Affordable
Care
Care
Act.
Act.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
They
love them.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh no, I love this one. I love that one. Oh yeah, this one's good. Oh, that
But what
one's
do you think of
pretty good.
Obamacare? Oh, I hate it.
Oh, I hate it. Yep, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And it's a branding issue. And the bottom line is the other thing is the idea that roads in wintry and, by the way, economically successful Massachusetts can be compared to like a
roads in Arizona.
500-mile road in the desert of Arizona.
Right.
Is just completely preposterous.
And not only that, but then he goes on to talk about the Big Dig. Well, the Big Dig was a $15 billion boondoggle in the middle of Boston, and that pumped up that $679,000 figure he's talking about.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, and by the way, and there's another, again, there's all these little, almost everything in that clip infuriates me in some way. Well, Senator Moore's been around since before I've been born. Yeah, but he hasn't been in the Senate since before you were born and had very little, if anything, to do with the Big Dig.
Right.
So, yeah, that's just a red herring.
Right, and also the context of this, the question was about the automatic gas tax, about the increase, the yearly increase that they were going to do for the gas tax.
Yeah, and somehow
now, that may or may not have been a flawed policy. I personally was in favor of the automatic increase. The way that I looked at it was, truth to tell, the gas tax should have been increased from 19 cents per gallon to 36 cents per gallon because that's where its buying power had gone. Instead of raising it up to 36 cents per gallon, the legislature raised it to 24 cents per gallon with an automatic increase every year. I thought that was fair, and I thought, certainly I look at taxes differently than many people across the aisle from me. I look at taxes as the price we pay for our civilization, that we need to pay our taxes in order to have the civilization we have. You look at the average per capita tax burden, if you want to call it a burden. I don't really look at it as a burden. I look at it as a tax obligation. We all want society. We all want a safe place to live. We all have an obligation to provide that for ourselves. The average tax paid by a per capita by a Massachusetts resident is about $7,000.
Yeah.
Snow removal alone is worth the price of admission. Within hours after a massive winter storm, the roads are clear. You can go anywhere in the state, do anything you need to do. Snow removal alone is huge. Never mind police protection, fire protection, roads, bridges, schools, all the other services that our government provides us with. To be certain, people want to make sure that they're getting a good value for their money whenever they're spending money, whether it's taxes or any other spending decision that you make. Of course, with taxes, it's not a decision. You have to pay them. But still, you are getting a good value, and I wish that people could understand that.
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny. I am not an ideologue. I am very much a pragmatist. I have, Republican friends on Facebook think I'm a Democrat, and most of my critics on Twitter who follow my foreign policy think I'm, a raving neocon, and I've got, a dinner date with the Bush twins or something. Any of these things, I'm definitely somewhere in the middle on most issues. But I look at an issue like taxes and spending as, are we making investments? If you said to the average American, look, if your son or daughter could get into a good school on a good scholarship, but it's still going to cost. You're still going to have to take out loans. Oh, yeah, well, that's an investment we'll make. Okay, well, now you're going to buy a house. Oh, sure, if
That's
it's
an investment that's worth making.
If it's the right house and it's within, it meets all the right criteria.
In the right town, in the the town with a good school system,
right.
et cetera, all those things. Yeah.
So well, guess what? Our government has infinitely more power to invest in things in the long term than you or I, because when I invest in something it's hard for a person, an individual, to invest in something that's going to pay off in 30 or 50 years, right?
Right.
But it's easy. The roads I drove on to get here, were built a very long time ago.
Yep.
If I had a longer commute, they would be built by, Eisenhower after World War II.
Yep.
These are investments that continue to repay. And this is, when we talk about Barack Obama's legacy, here's what we're going to see. We're going to see that, in fact, Barack Obama was an expert at restoring the economy to where it was, and even better than it was in 2008 when the collapse
when everything crashed. Yep.
and the right keeps attacking Obama for all of the wrong reasons. Because when I look at Obama, I think, okay, but where was the investment where was the vision? Why don't we have massive infrastructure? And this is not just Obama's fault, it's Congress as well. Why don't we have massive infrastructure spending where we're investing in these bridges that are falling down?
Where we need it,
Where we're securing coastline against rising waters and stronger hurricanes. Where we're improving rail service in parts of the country that don't have it. Why aren't we investing in solar power or in energy saving?
Right.
All of our government buildings should be running at all as close to carbon neutral as possible, and that could have put a lot of people to work.
Absolutely.
It could have put engineers to work who design these things.
When you talk about solar power, everybody points to Solyndra. They say, "What about Solyndra? Where $550 million went down the tubes."
Look, if you look at Rick Perry, okay, so I love Rick Perry.
I don't like to look at Rick Perry, but
because. Rick Perry and who was the governor in Illinois? In Indiana.
Mike Pence, was it? Or
no. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
Those two states, okay, both Republican, were Mitch Daniels, were pumping massive amounts of money into private industry. So it's effectively, you're giving private industry low interest loans and tax breaks to come into your state and produce a whole lot of jobs. And they all figured out, well, geez, this pays off. It pays off really well. So, Solyndra is the example of the company that it fails in. And in a place like Texas, what you see is that companies fail all the time.
Right.
And many of those companies had
the same breaks or
either federal or state guarantees.
Yep.
Okay, but they're just propped up by that many other successes.
Yeah.
So it's just a red herring.
And you also look at something like China. I mean, we did try to subsidize Solyndra with a loan guarantee, but China is pumping $40 billion a year into their solar industry, and that's why Chinese panels are able to flood the market.
That's right. Of course, what this means is that, again, my response to that would be, okay, well, the government has the ability to say, well, look, we're going to fund putting solar panels on government buildings, but the solar panels have got to be made in the United States. So again, this just takes vision.
Right.
And then what that would do is it would drive down the cost and make American companies far more successful in the long run. But we don't have that vision because we like to bumper sticker everything.
Right.
Well, the world is far more complicated than the bumper sticker is going to allow.
Let's play one more clip from the debate. Brett, if you could bring up clip B. This is one where Ryan made a quip towards the end.
Thank you for the question.
That I wanted to discuss.
The record also shows, according to the Senate Clerk's office, that Senator Moore has voted in the last 4 years 90% of the time with his party's leadership. So when you're voting with the Republicans, it's not too often. Secondly, he mentioned political posturing in filing amendments that are common sense, like requiring a social security number to sign up for public benefits, or putting a photo ID on the EBT card. It's Republicans that have brought forward these issues and created awareness about all the money and the fraud and the waste and the abuse. That's something that I think balance brings. And I think that you're right. We need a Republican governor to restore balance in this state. That's why I'm supporting Charlie Baker, and don't really understand why you're supporting Martha Coakley. But at the same time, I've always been willing to reach across party lines and make sure that we achieve success. You have to as a Republican, because there's so many Democrats, and that's fine. My mom's a Democrat. My dad's a Republican. Said my mom had good ideas. My dad knew how to pay for them. And to me, that's the approach you'll be able to take when I go to the state Senate.
So interesting clip that he, or quip that he used towards the end there, that while his mom had good ideas, his dad knew how to pay for them. Who is a better steward of the economy? That's one of my big questions that I love to talk about with people. Are Democrats or Republicans a better steward of the economy? And Money Magazine actually put a graphic together that really highlights this. Large graphic. I had to break it up into pieces. Brett, the graphic that was shown in error earlier, I believe it was AE2, if you could pull that one up. Yeah, bulls, bears, donkeys, and elephants, updated for 2012. This was the most recent part of this graphic that I could find. Tommy McCall used to work for Money Magazine. He now owns his own business called Infographics.com. And he wants to try to balance things. He says, since 1925, Republicans and Democrats have controlled the presidency for roughly 44 years each. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine that you invested in the market under one party, but not the other. If market movements are a reflection of investor confidence in the economy, then under which party did the market perform best over the past 88 years? As of October 31st, 2012, a $10,000 investment in the S&P stock market index would have grown to $25,775 if invested under Republican presidents only. That's a $15,775 gain, or a 2.2% average annualized return over 44 years. With Democratic presidents, $10,000 would have grown to $527,303 at a compound rate of 9.5% over 43.7 years. And to show that graphically, Brett, if you could pull up the next one that shows the two circles, there's a smaller red circle and a larger blue circle on that graphic. I'm uncertain of the name. There it is. Capital gains on a $10,000 investment in the S&P market under each political party. $15,000, $775 gain under Republicans, $517,303 under Democrats. Who is a better steward of the economy? I think this kind of makes it plain. Brett, there's one more graphic with the arrows going up and down, illustrates it again. There it is. I'll be happy to post these graphics and some supporting data on gbvdems.org. Our viewers are invited to go to gbvdems.org, look under our news section. That's where my blog entries go, and I will have those out there by the time the show is on the air. But again,
yeah, I mean, a great example of this is the auto bailout. Okay, Republicans were freaking out about the auto bailout, but
Mitt Romney, let Detroit go bankrupt.
Let Detroit go bankrupt.
Yep.
Okay, and the argument that the Democrats made at the time was, well, but do you know what the financial cost of having Detroit go bankrupt would be? It would be disastrous, okay?
Sure.
The argument, though, that they didn't make strongly enough is that the American people, you, me, I pointed to you, me, you, me, the American people made profit off of those loans.
Sure, they called GM.
By the way,
they called GM Government Motors,
yes,
right? Yeah,
have been completely repaid.
yeah.
So we actually made money. That was an example of an investment that was made that stopped one disaster, which was, stopped a negative,
Yep.
and then actually had a net positive.
And the ripple effect, had Detroit gone bankrupt, what a nightmare. Detroit, the city, is in real trouble, but at least the automakers are still solvent and actually performing better. The ripple effect throughout the economy would have been an absolute nightmare.
Absolutely, and okay, who do we blame for these things? So what's interesting is I have a very different perspective on a lot of these issues. I sort of stopped paying, I pay a lot of attention to domestic news, but I stopped debating it as much because I got very frustrated at the low level of debate where it's just sort of infantile name calling. So I pay a lot of attention to foreign policy. And what's interesting is in dictatorships, where you don't have politics, dictatorships have a lot of bad things, but then you see that the dictators make, in some of these more successful countries, make some of these decisions that are actually really good. And you see that when, the idea of a government investing in, in an investment that's going to pay off in 5 or 10 years or 20 years, and that has paid off. And so when you remove the politics from a lot of these issues, there's actually not that much debate inside the policies on some of these issues.
Right.
And that's where it gets frustrating.
So we only have about 7 minutes left. Believe it or not, we've chewed up most of an hour at this point. We did want to touch on race relations in the U.S. and from a broader perspective, your perspective, worldwide, how race relations look and how the United States looks actually on a worldwide stage. Right now, there are protests going on across the country. A lot of young, unarmed black men seem to have been killed by police this year. There's the Mike Brown, there's Tamir Rice, there's Eric Garner, there's John Crawford. That's just the ones that I can name off the top of my head. I could go on and on about with a lot of names. Amadou Diallo. There's been a lot of names in the news over the last several years with unarmed black men being killed by police. And people are protesting now. They're out in the streets and they're saying we want responsible, accountable policing. With a reduction in the use of deadly force. Your thoughts on what's going on in the country?
So what's happening globally is that technology, the internet, cell phones, the camera phone, are putting eyes on things that didn't have eyes on them before.
Right.
So you had some weird disease that made you bleed to death in the middle of the jungle or something that didn't have, and now we have Ebola. Who knows how long it's been here. And that's just one example, right? Police brutality is not a new thing, but now we're seeing it. But see this is where the problem is, because if you go to the Gardner case or some of these other cases, not only are we seeing it, but then still nothing's being done about it.
Right.
And and not in all circumstances either. There was an example just a couple of weeks ago where an elderly Hispanic man who worked at a car dealership was tasered by a young white 23-year-old police officer for no discernible reason that I can see. The whole thing was caught on video. That police officer was disciplined and no charges were filed. Is that justice? I don't know, but it's not. It was a wrong was corrected, perhaps. So there is some progress, but what disappoints me is that there is a level of conversation which is not particularly elevated. There's a lot of people talking about this, but they're not talking to each other yet.
Yeah, they're talking beyond each other.
They're still talking past each other.
Yep.
Okay, so look. I have a lot of sympathy for a police officer that's trying to do his job in a situation where, he may feel afraid for his life or things of this nature. But we cannot deny the fact that when a police officer shoots someone by accident or intentionally they thought it was justified and it wound up not being justified.
Sure. Yeah, Amadou Diallo reached for his wallet.
More often than not, the person who gets shot is not white. Okay, and this is the words we are even using. Is this racism? Of course it's racism, but we have to rethink racism. We think racism of the way the 1850s, really, white people killing and enslaving black people because of the color of their skin. That's not really racism. I mean, it is. That is really racism. But don't take that out of context. But what racism really is it's the hidden biases that are built into our own psychology.
Exactly.
Our own, and this is not what's being
not only
addressed.
that, not only that, but we see biases in the media. There's a famous case from the Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. There was two pictures. You could see them side by side that were shown. There was a white couple wading through waist-deep water, and they had a couple of bags of bread and some other stuff that they had gotten from a store. And the caption said, this couple found some food. There was some black folks doing exactly the same thing, and the caption read that they were looters. What's the difference there? The color of their skin. This afternoon, even, there was a case of a white woman who went driving around. I forget what town it was in. I read about it this afternoon. She went driving around town firing a gun into several cars. Luckily enough, she didn't wound anybody. But the police, after they found her in a parking lot. She led them in a high-speed chase across town. She pointed her weapon at them several times. Eventually, the police apprehended her without incident or injury.
This is a great point. So I used to teach, and when I was first out of college. And at one point I worked with special needs students, and I was trained in sort of methodology to deal with them. And some of them were violent, and you were taught, okay, this is how you protect yourself and the student. So they're out of control or whatever it is your job to bring them under control without hurting anyone.
Right.
And that's a policy decision. Where some of the blame on these individual cops or whatever. No, I don't believe these cops woke up one morning and said, "I want to shoot a black person." They were put in a situation where training and years of policy and years of financial neglect have led us to this point. And that's what I hope we are talking about in 2015.
And truly, like you said, we need to stop talking past each other and start talking to each other.
Absolutely. Start having actual dialogue about how to fix together some of these issues, as opposed to just blaming, this, that, or the other thing.
Right. So we've been talking here on All Politics is Local with Jim Miller. Jim's the managing editor of The Interpreter. What's your website, Jim?
It is interpretermag.com, as in Interpreter Magazine. Okay. And you can also find me on Twitter at Miller Mina, M-E-N-A.
Miller Mina?
Miller Mina.
At Miller Mina on Twitter. Are you on Facebook, anything like that?
No, I keep my Facebook private.
Okay. Jim, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's been a great conversation. Really glad that you could make it, especially on short notice. I only called Jim at noontime today and asked him if he could be on. So terrific, great of you to be here. You've been watching All Politics is Local. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show as much as I did. Thank you for tuning in. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, feel free to visit our website, www.gbvdems.org. Good night, everybody.